And hello, everybody. You're very welcome to a new Music Evolves podcast here on ITSP Magazine. This is Sean Martin, your host, and I have the pleasure of talking about a passion of mine, which is music. And I love making music. I love creating music. I love listening to music. And I love people that do the same. And funny enough, there's a lot of folks in the other industry that I work in that a lot of them have instruments and play and perform, and it's amazing the number of people that have music connected to their daily lives in some way or another. Not everyone gets to do something professionally music wise. I chose a path that didn't take me down the music path. Sometimes I regret that, but there are people who create music and perform music, and then there's a whole ecosystem surrounding those folks that bring it all to life in streaming and in movies and all kinds of places. And that ecosystem is what we're going to talk a bit about today. And I'm thrilled to have Chris SD on. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you on the show. And we're going to talk about kind of what it takes to get music in front of people, and what it looks like from an artist perspective, what it looks like from the other perspective of finding good songs for commercials and movies and things like that. Before we get into all of that good stuff, maybe a few words from you about who you are, what you've done, what you're up to now, and then we'll have some fun. Not that
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
not fun,
absolutely. So essentially, I started off as a music producer up in Toronto, Canada. And I had a band before that, but really, how it relates to sync licensing and getting songs into TV and film. My sort of genesis was up in Toronto as a producer, and I had the good fortune of winning some awards, doing what I did. And I used to work with major label artists, but I also worked with indie artists, music that I loved. Often the indie music was just as good as the major label music. And either they'd be friends or people I was trying to support their music with. And the problem is that, we would work really hard on an album and it would go out into the ether and nothing would happen, just because they didn't have all the people helping them along, like managers and agents and labels. So I was thinking, like, how can I help them? Or is there a way to get these records out to make a bigger splash? Part of it was selfish, I have to admit, because I was just working so hard on these albums. I wanted something to happen, along with the band and stuff like that. So we put our heads together and we're thinking about, like, what should we be doing and how should this work? And right around that time, sync licensing started to become a thing, where before it was like selling out. So nobody wanted to be in a show or a movie or an ad because they were typically, the standard fare that was on like cable TV, and wasn't the best sort of, thing that people thought would represent their music. But then when streaming started happening and things started to, expand, we had Netflix, with an early adopter, and all these new companies coming out producing a lot more different kinds of shows. All of a sudden people realized, wait a minute, these shows are shows I love watching. And if I like watching them and I think they're cool, then the people who watch them are going to be my ideal fans for my music because they're the same kind of people who watch the show as well. So it became this thing where it's like, you can get massive exposure. And then on top of that, I started hearing musicians, here and there, like, oh, I got a sync placement in this big show. I paid my rent for like a year, and I was like, what? What is this licensing thing? So it just was starting to become a thing. And that was when I decided I needed to help the indie artists in the studio try to get their music into TV and film for the exposure. Money is amazing, but it's the exposure I thought was going to be the biggest part of it. And so I slowly started getting to know music supervisors. And those are the people who actually get music for TV and film. They're hired by the studios, like the TV studios and movie studios. They work with the producers and directors who are too busy, to worry about music. So they hire someone to handle the music side of things. And that's called a music supervisor. So I started, running into these supervisors as much as I could, forming more and more relationships with them. And then fast forward, that was about 15 years ago. And fast forward to now, I know a ton of supervisors. Also, most of them are actually in Los Angeles. I ended up moving to LA and started, doing things there. And I have a ton of network, a huge network of supervisors. And really, what I do now is I connect indie songwriters from sort of all over the world directly with these people at the top of the TV and film industry so they can get their music to them and get their songs into shows, movies, and ads.
You must have a lot of friends.
Well,
So,
I will. I will say the same thing about the way I feel about friends on social media. I have fewer, but I what I consider quality. You
there
know.
you go. There you go. Well, let's talk a bit more about kind of the process, and I want to kind of tap into two parts of this. So, clearly, music is emotional. Um, it's oftentimes created with some emotion, some event, um, and that comes through the music. And when movies and commercials and wherever else the music is involved, it's trying it. I've often heard the idea that the music is a third, an additional actor in the movie or whatever, bringing its own voice and its own feelings to it. So there's that part of it, and I think marrying those the creators and the people who publish or present the music in the movies and commercials and whatnot, um, that emotion connects, but much more and more where everything's driven by technology. So I'd like your thoughts on how much of it is still the emotional. There's a connection there with the music between the people and the value or perhaps the distraction that technology might bring, because so much more music created because of technology, so many more movies and commercials created, so many more shorts and all kinds of different things created because of technology. So where does all that fit together in your mind?
Yeah, yeah. Great question. I think that it's important to, in order to figure out where we're going or what might be righter than wronger, because there's no really right or wrong. We need to look where we've been. We need to look into the past. And when we look into the past, we see technology has advanced incredibly. And we can, I mean, besides in everything, we can focus strictly on music if we want. And an example I use is, if you go back to the 1700s, you've got orchestras, right? And stringed instruments that started to become a thing and composers created for these orchestras. And you realize that at the time that was super high tech. I mean, that was cutting edge, that was like space age for music, technology. And a lot of the music before that was played by, people on their lyres or their stringed guitars and, whatever that was. So, and ironically now we look at that as like a classical music and we call it classical music. And the music that survives, my guess is because we don't know much of the music that didn't survive because the stuff that survived got passed along and there was no recording back then, of course. And so I am guessing the music that survived through technology, not only with orchestras, but with all technology all the way till today, is music that did not rely on the technology to be music. When a new technology comes out, or a new catchphrase, or a new meme, or a new fad, or anything like that, people glom onto it, and everybody jumps on the bandwagon. Not everybody, but a lot of people jump on the bandwagon, and they pummel it to death because it lives only for itself. So, for example, in music, if you have a technology that autotune, for example, when it came out, and I think Cher was actually one of the first people, their producer, whoever that was, used autotune to kind of affect her voice to sound it, make a little synthy, and everyone's like, "Whoa, what's that sound?" They just ramped the attack on the autotune a lot faster, and boom, you got that effect. So the thing was is that if people were making records thinking this is the trick, this is the thing, right? And they just plowed every vocal through this auto tune, regardless of the song, regardless of the rest of the production, they might, get a little bit more attention because it was like in the moment, right? That was the popular thing, but it really never didn't last. There's no, no music's going to last just on the gimmick of the technology. So just to put a period on this, I think that what's a very important about technology and music and using the technology is understanding what the technology is for, and you know embracing it, but at the same time using it in the context of communicating musically, and that's it. The Beatles used synthesizers on their, like, at least last record, I think Abbey Road, but it's not, they didn't go, ooh, synthesizers, and then suddenly, you know, created this opus of synthesizers. They just used it where it worked, and I think that is the key, and not to get distracted by all the shiny things or fearful about things. I'm sure we're going to skid into AI in a minute, this conversation, but not to be overly fearful at the beginning, and look at it for what it is, and look at what music is, what it is, and use it as a vehicle, not as an end to itself.
And I'm curious, because I don't know this space well. Do I know how I create personally? It's for myself, but I'm wondering, when people are creating music, do they create a song for commercials and movies, or do they create it and then hope to find, or and they create it to be published as a song, and then hopefully it'll find some exposure through those, or combination? What's that look like?
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of people think exactly that. They think that in order to get music into TV and film, you have to write for TV and film. So that you've got to kind of look at a show or a movie or an ad and say, well, if I want to get music into there, I've got to write what they want. I look at the show and, like, well, they're kind of doing this, and I better learn how to do that, and then write it so it kind of sounds exactly like that. So there are some people, not very many, but there are some people who do that successfully. They make six figures a year. They're constantly producing music. They're very prolific. They're usually producers. They've got their own studio. They work very fast. They work very hard. And they get good at being able to, usually they stay within their niche, but they get good at sort of predicting and what's going to work, and they can get those pieces placed, and they have relationships, of course, in the industry to make that happen. The vast majority of all other music, which is mainly independent music, a lot of people also will talk about that in a bit. A lot of people think, well, it's just for major label artists. No, there's actually more indie music in TV and film than major label artists, because indie music is a lot cheaper. We'll get to that later. But the thing is, the most important thing to remember is that if you're trying to get your music into TV and film, all you've got to do is write from your heart and your soul. Basically, all the songs you already wrote, all the ones you've already recorded, are worth something. And all the music that you're about to write, you should write for the reasons that you're writing music. It's just like creating it, just like you were saying, creating it for you, creating it for fans, creating it about something you care about, someone you care about, someone, whatever. It doesn't even matter. So the bottom line is that music supervisors, we were talking about earlier, they want authenticity. They don't want to have music that sounds like it's trying to be something, any more than we like to meet someone who's putting on an air, or you just don't feel comfortable around them, and you're not sure why, because you feel like they're trying too hard to get you to like them, or there's something going on. We like people to be themselves, and our moms all told us that, right? Just be yourself. And
Exactly.
so the thing is that is the most important thing in sync licensing. And that's the beauty of being an indie songwriter right now, is being able to do that.
So what are all? And I keep going back to the same two examples, and I'm sure there are a gazillion others. I go to the movies and commercials just because those are the two that kind of strike me as places music is placed a lot. And I'll give an example of one. It was a commercial that aired during uh, COVID that was talking about getting back into the community and supporting the community. I think it was a credit union commercial. I had no idea what there was a song that I loved. I was like, how do I find that song? I eventually found it, but it took me a really, really long time, like months, to figure out what it was. So I always think of commercials. But what are the other places that music is synced? The other place I think of, because I do a lot of production on these types of things, is the music libraries of loops and sample tracks and things like that that you hear in some of the bumpers, and some that I've used in some of my material I've heard on commercials as well. So what are the places that music gets synced to beyond just movies and commercials?
Right. So just to clarify, the thing about libraries and then venues, or formats that you can
Hmm.
be synced to. So one is like more of a storage. Maybe we'll start there real fast. As a lot of people think that the best way to get your music into TV and film is to go into a music library or get a sync agent. Those are the two traditional paths. So a music library is just a place where you upload your music. It's like a big sort of, you know, honestly, it's like a brick and mortar library, but for music, but it's online. And the music just sits in there and accumulates. And then music supervisors can come and they can look for music, peruse for music in there with the different search terms and things like that. And then on the other side, you have a sync agent, and they're usually sign you, or sign your songs. They say, hey, like, I'll sign you. Usually they take half your money, but that's okay because you might think, well, it's found money. They got the relationships. Why not let them do the work than me doing it? I can focus on what I'm focusing on and they can pitch music. So they also do that in behind the scenes. So that all sounds great. Sounds like a fantastic way to go. Why even bother any other way? The problem, and specifically today, the problem is everybody's got an album out. Like everybody's got one out. So it's like there's millions and millions of songwriters and millions of tracks all vying for listeners, all trying to get into TV and film, all looking for label deals. Radio is almost out of reach, but people still dream of doing that. So everybody's lost in the sea of music now because it's so easy to record something and put it out. There's something like 100,000 tracks every day uploaded to Spotify. So it's very daunting. The biggest challenge is like, how do you even get heard? That's the biggest challenge nowadays. So if you go into one of these libraries, music libraries, or you go with an agency with a huge roster, you're basically in an ocean of music. You're playing a lottery. You're like a needle in a haystack. So I thought the best thing to do was to go straight to the source, go to the music supervisors, who are the people putting the music into TV and film. So yeah, I just wanted to cover like that's the sort of the main places that people will find, like they find loops and things like that. Those loops that you found to use, and I've used those like that before. We spent however long looking for them. The odds of us finding that specific loop were extremely low because there were so many other loops out there, right? And same thing with songs out there. So you want to have relationships in the industry. You want to connect directly with the music supervisors if you can. That's super hard because the supervisors are inundated. And so the whole point is trying to connect with them, which is kind of what I do, right? But the to answer your question about where can music be synced, like is it just with music supervisors with TV and film and whatever? So you've got like shows, obviously, right? All kinds of different shows, from reality TV to network, big hot shows on streaming or whatever. Films of all kinds, Hollywood blockbusters, all the way down to student films. You've got ads of all, you know,
Right.
vectors for
Yeah,
ads.
dropped into YouTube and on television. Yeah,
Yeah,
different
like ads
sizes and
all over the
formats. Yeah.
place. Yeah, there's also a bunch of like things like wedding videos, for example.
Yeah.
That's called micro licensing, where there's people who need music on for their YouTube videos or for their channel, things that you and I might do as well, like for our YouTube stuff. And you can go to specific libraries or find the music. You can get sync placements through that as well. So it's really anything that needs music to visual is essentially how music gets licensed. And licensing is simply saying, here's my music, I'm going to lend it to you, like to the use of it, you can use it in this particular way for this particular spot for this particular time, and I want you to pay me. And so you get paid for them to do that. You also can get back end royalties as well, every time it's aired, kind of thing. So that's really what it is. And the last thing to say about that is that licensing to me is such an amazing way to get your music out there in a big way. It is the last bastion of for indie songwriters to make a huge splash quickly and easily if you're connected to the right people. You know,
Hmm.
everything else is a slog these days, social media and let alone touring or anything like that. I mean, it's much, much more difficult to be heard nowadays.
Yeah. And so exposure is a big part of it. Obviously, that's what you're talking about there. Can you clearly making a buck can be, um, yeah, intriguing as well, right? Nice to make a buck if you can. Do you have any sense of what people make for different types of placements? I'm sure it's a depends kind of answer, but what can you share there?
Yeah, yeah. So it's all over the map, right? It depends on first. There's sort of two axes for this. The first one is that it depends on what it is. So typically, soap operas, reality TV, they're going to pay extremely low amounts. Some of them don't pay at all. It's like, hey, we want to use your song, and you're going to get some exposure. You can decide whether to do that or not. And then it moves up into like lower tier shows, ones that are not prime time or whatever. And then you might be looking at like getting $500 for that, $750, $1,000 for placement in those. Then you got like the mid tier shows, that are sort of, more popular, and there's, more viewable and more accessible essentially. And then you're looking at 1,000, 1,500, 2,000. Then you're getting into the bigger shows, right? And you're getting up into the 5,000s, and then you can get big shows, like the big spots, like a season finale and all of that. And then you're looking at 10, 20, 30,000 sometimes. I got an artist, helped an artist get $30,000 for one sync placement in the season finale of a show. So, and then it goes, ads can pay even more. You get a new Apple ad, you might be getting six figures for that, possibly, or at least maybe 50 grand or something. So it's all over the map. And it depends why you want to get into sync licensing. If you're thinking of like, hey, I want to make a career out of it, well, there's certain ways to do it and certain ways not to do it. Or you might be an indie songwriter saying, I just want to be heard. If you get one placement on a major show, it's like 4 million people watching it. And then, I don't know, let's just be super conservative and say there's 20% of them that Shazam your song on the show. That's like a ton of new fans, right? Hitting your email list. So that's an incredible way to go. I mean, I've worked with artists, helped them. I have one example. They got into the movie Pain Hustlers. It was a major placement. They ended up in Billboard magazine. Their Spotify spins went off the charts. They were called by festivals to go play. I had another one who got 6 placements in a row from Italy. A guy from Italy. He went on a world tour because the placements were so good. People all knew the songs. He had gotten all these new fans. He just booked a world tour. So it is incredible power. You're riding on the coattails of the movie studios and the TV studios. It's amazing.
And on that note, there's because you mentioned indie artists a lot here, and indie short for independent, and the natural instinct, at least for me, is to think small. But there are independent artists that have huge followings. I think there's one in particular I can name. Right? I think maybe you even did when we were talking about him this earlier. Um, what I guess there's the independent. They still own the rights to their music. There's some that are signed, but they still own the rights. There's some that have the rights owned by others. What does that landscape look like in terms of licensing? Does it change who gets selected for what types of songs get selected for different types of things?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. So just so you know, I use independent songwriters as a big, broad bucket, right? Where anybody to essentially define the difference between, successfully funded songwriters and people who are generally having to do it on their own. And I don't specify between, well, these are hyper successful indie songwriters, and then these are, somebody just writing songs in their basement and they've got 4 fans and their mom likes them, but indie songwriters are people that I've worked with a lot. I really care about supporting, And I'm assuming it's the majority of people out there who have an album, but just don't really have much else going on, which is unfortunately the norm,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So to take an indie songwriter and say, well, you know, um, where can you go with your career and how you can do that, just to follow your question, like, can you be a bit more specific with your question again, just based on that?
Yeah. So I think we're pretty much talking about artists who create things that don't have an ecosystem and a huge treasure trove of funds to grow, right? But there are some that still maybe they started that way and have maintained their independence, even though they have great exposure and great wealth from it. That's not who we're really
Right.
talking about here, but I think they probably have a relationship with with the people placing the songs anyway, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, yes and no's. They might be. So this is the interesting thing. If you want to be, you know, on in a library, or you want to be with an agent, you want to be successful. You got to be famous or semi-famous or like really big, right? I had somebody very famous, an older artist who was famous, very famous in the past, and was known for their work then, and they got a hold of me and they said, Chris, I want to work with you and do some stuff with you. And I said, no, 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 you don't want to do it my way. What I do this for independent songwriters to give them a huge shortcut, directly to the top people, in like TV and film. You're already famous. You should go get an agent. Like, just because of your name, you're going to be able to get placements. So there's this big differentiator between being known and not being known. And I'm not going to say what percentages here, but we're going to say like 1% probably of everyone who's got a record out, if that, is successful enough to someone to pick the phone up, and say, hey, we'd love to license your song. Now, TV studios and movie studios would love to, help out indie songwriters. They a lot of them are in the entertainment industry because they came up through maybe music or film themselves, but it's all the money talks, right? And so it's a business. So if they could, they would be like licensing music from major label artists, and that's it. Because why not? Why not go for the biggest songs or the most known? The problem is they can't afford it, right? So they go to the indie songwriters and say, hey, instead of paying 100,000 for this, major label artist or classic artist, I'd rather pay you, 10,000 or 5,000, if that's okay with you, because your master is a lot cheaper than their master recording. So, ultimately it comes down to, if you're already known and stuff, when you don't need me, you should take the traditional routes because it's built for that. You can get a publishing deal and they can still do really well. If you're in the much, much bigger group of not being known and don't know kind of where to go next and so on, then my advice is to try to connect directly with the people to form relationships with the actual people in TV and film. This is very difficult. You have to do it in a particular sort of way, kind of thing.
yeah. No, I love that. Thanks for that. You mentioned we were going to slide into this, so let's do it now. The world of AI, and it connects. Obviously, it's technology, and I believe it has its place in every aspect of what we're talking about: creation, performance, and everywhere through even placements. The Where I see a lot of it, just not just in the music industry, is to help streamline and automate a lot of things. So traditional processes in business or traditional ways of production, I use it a lot in producing these videos, for example. Um, there's a lot of value there, but it does turn into a machine doing these things for humans. So what role does AI have in helping artists and agents and people placing music to really even further find the right thing, or does it end up becoming an Achilles heel and we kind of shortcut and eliminate the human and the humanness of a lot of this again.
Yeah. No, great. In terms of AI, where it is now is there are some people who can produce pretty good music, with just using prompts, with some of the AI things. Now, the problem is that, regardless of how good they can make it, one, the sound quality is never the same. Like I had somebody send me something that was well put together, and they actually own the AI company, and they're a musician, and they are experts in what they do. And they sent me this song, and I heard it, and I was like, that is very catchy. It's really, really, catchy song. But when you listen to the kick drum and the beat, and it just didn't have the same impact as a real
Mm.
recording, and some of the sounds in the behind were just like, that's got that sheeny, glossy, like weird sort of AI thing going on. And the lyrics, of course, were written with AI, and it was like, oh, you can tell. It's like, so even the best of the best right now is a long way from being something that is going to usurp humans, take over or something like that. So it could happen one day, but we're certainly not there yet. The much bigger deal, and why indie songwriters should feel quite safe and happy about this, is when you can't use an AI song in TV and film right now because of the copyright issue.
Mm.
You have to
Right.
own the copyright. And as much as AI company says, hey, our terms of use, you own everything that you do, the Copyright Office and the laws do not recognize it. So you can't use a purely created AI song in TV and film. And if you try to pass one off to a supervisor, if when you are found out, that's a great way to get blacklisted. You'll never work in TV and film again if you're doing that, trying to like sneak them in type of thing. So that's the biggest problem. It's a legal problem because you'll create problems for everybody legally. And then the other element, of course, is that, as I was saying, alluding to earlier, they want authenticity. It's about writing your own music from your heart and your soul. AI doesn't have that authenticity. It's pretty, it's shiny, and it's impressive right out of the box for what you can imagine it can do. But when you actually compare, apples to apples and all of that, you realize is like, okay, so the human's still winning, and the human wins huge on the authenticity and the meaning and the connection with the audience. And that is the major part of why music goes into TV and film in the first place, is to enhance the drama, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't even put music in. Why put music in if it's just real life, like, walking through the woods, crunch, 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 crunch. It's not as emotive without the strings.
Right.
So that's really what it is. So indie songwriters are very quite safe right now with this.
And how about yes, we talked. You mentioned Spotify, and there's a lot of algorithm, and I'm sure there certainly has to be, probably for a long time now, analysis of what you're listening to and why you're listening to it, when you're listening to it, to determine what you want to listen to next, or the next album that comes out that you should be alerted on. And so, how does that translate to, perhaps, I don't know, can artists find those trends and create ahead of them, do you think? And do people looking for music, can they use AI to kind of help them narrow down to certain artists and types of songs? Or
Yeah. Let me tell you a quick story that answers this. When I first started in my band, my brother and I were in a band together. And we, early on, before we knew very much about anything, we went to a conference in Toronto. And one of the keynote speakers there was Malcolm McLaren, sort of the late and ex manager of the Sex Pistols. And he was there, and I really wanted to talk to him, but we were a little bit late, and he was actually leaving. We had missed his talk, and he was coming down the hallway. I thought, man, I really wanted to, hear what he had to say. And so he was coming down the hallway with his entourage, and they were trying to leave the building. And I kind of positioned myself in front of him. I said, Malcolm, just really fast, I'm really sorry. Do you have any advice for an indie musician just starting out? And he looked at my brother and I kind of quizzically, and we had those, lanyards around our neck, with your name tag for that you wear at conferences. And I think he went over to my brother and he took it off his chest, lifted it over his head, and he threw it on the floor. And he said, First of all, you don't come to here to these conferences. You go home and write music and make them come to you. In my terrible imitation of his English accent. And it was really struck me, that that is really what it's all about. It's not chasing after trends. It's not chasing the industry. It's not chasing things that people might want. It's about doing what you do best and then bringing that to the table, because everyone in the industry and everybody out there is looking for the cool next thing. They're not looking for more of what's happening. Now, you did say get ahead of the trends, but who knows what those trends are? If people could figure that out, no one would be in the stock market. It wouldn't exist. Everyone would know what stock's going to be hot and what company's going to do what. The same in the music. If people knew what was going to be a hit, everyone would just write that hit. Nobody knows. And so the best thing you can do is come to the table with that preparedness. So when the opportunities show up, it turns into success. And be yourself, do what you do best. The history is littered with this stuff. It's just every great artist that ever came out wasn't chasing trends. And I'm talking about the classics.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah, there's some people who squeeze in a radio single here and there because they're just jumping on a bandwagon right at the moment, and they happen to luck out because the song was good and the artist was pretty good. But the stuff that lasts is seminal, for music. The year Captain and Tennille won their Grammy Award, the Velvet Underground released their record. So which one became more relevant?
It's that's a great point. So, Chris, I know you do a lot for the folks in music, and I believe you have a panel coming up. Can you tell me a little bit about what that's about, who it's for, who's participating?
Yeah. So basically, helping indie songwriters and trying to get give them a chance to get their music out there in such a bigger way than maybe it's happening now. One thing that I came up with, and I've been doing it for several years now, and it's been a huge success, is basically the Sync Songwriter Music Supervisor panel. It's basically a panel of 5 top music supervisors who they're people I work with, all the time. And I bring them on to a free virtual panel. It's online. You just show up to it, and you can learn all about like how indie music in sync licensing works, kind of the behind the scenes stuff, like what they're looking for, what kind of indie music they're looking for, why they're looking for indie music, maybe like yours or anybody listening, what you can get paid, and most importantly, how you can connect directly to them, which is extremely hard to do. But that's an amazing resource for indie songwriters to basically get their first foot in the door in the TV and film industry to license their music. So it's the panel's coming up actually January 11th.
It'll answer all the questions I have in my head, which I want to keep talking about, and I could talk to you for hours, Chris. But I think I'm gonna leave it with that thought, and that note there. I think be yourself, be open to it, be ready for it, and yeah, don't chase it. Let them come to you. Very cool. Well, yeah, hopefully I'll have a chance to have you back on. We can talk some more about different topics related to music. Maybe talk about your band and some of the stuff you did.
Yeah,
that'd be fun too.
that would be a blast.
Have you and your brother on or something, and yeah, super fun.
Yeah.
Appreciate you taking the time today, and of course I'll include links to your profiles wherever those might reside, so people can find you and connect with you and learn more about what you're up to and the things you've done. And Chris, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. That was great.
And thanks everybody for listening and watching this Music Evolves. Hopefully it's as insightful for you as it was for me, and a few answers, I suspect, alongside a few more questions, which is if I'm doing my job, that's what I'm hoping for. Get people to think and enjoy, and ultimately keep creating music as well. I think we need more music. So thanks everybody.